What's going on, guys? It's going to be our summary of markets week 60. Then we're going to get into our options watch list after that. I'm actually going to go over a little bit more information in this week's video. I want to show you guys some things that we talked about on Friday in Discord and on our live stream. I wanted to show you guys kind of what the indexes were doing with volume profile. So we're going to get to that kind of in between the summary and our watch list. But let's get started with the summary. So starting off with SPY. It looks pretty good. It had a pretty good bounce off the 50-day moving average. You had a little reclaim of 391.50, 393. It looks like we want to push into that 400 range that we've been itching to touch for the past, 2 months. So we almost tested that level back here in February, sold off. Almost tested it here in March, sold off. But both of these pullbacks, even this pullback here, they all are kind of bouncing off the 50-day moving average, while the 50-day moving average is continuing its trend. It's not even going sideways. It's not pulling back at all. The 50-day is pretty steady on an uptrend here. So this looks like we want to hit 400 within the next week or so, but we do have to wait and see how it reacts to this high, because it has not liked this high the past 2 times that it has tested it. So this does still look like a bulldog, where we had that double bottom. We had that pop-up, little pullback there, putting in the head of the bulldog, bouncing off the 50, and now we have that confirmation. So even if we have an inside day, or even 2 inside days here, this would still be a bulldog. It would just be a little choppy. But I'd say as long as we stay above 391, 390, this should be pretty bullish into 400. And then if we break above 400, I would be looking for that 408 to 410 area as our breakout target. We've had a lot of stuff happening the last few weeks. We had quad witching. We had the end of the quarter rebalancing. We had a crazy event happen on the last few days last week with a big trader. I believe it was a Chinese trader or some Asian trader. He had $15 billion worth of trading funds. He was trading on leverage, and he was getting liquidated on some massive positions. So if you guys saw what happened to Viacom or Discovery or a couple of those big telecommunication stocks, they were getting hammered. And they were getting hammered because that guy was getting liquidated. And that actually led to a couple of big funds, Goldman Sachs even, they were issuing block trades to try to buy up these positions or close the positions that they were in that were getting hurt. I think they had a big size position in Viacom that they had to close up, and they closed, I think it was over $10 billion worth of shares last week. So a little scary, but I think they were just reacting to that liquidation event. I don't think they're cashing out completely. I think most hedge funds are still very bullish right now. So I think SPY could easily get to 400, 410 unless they start unloading massive block trades. If you guys have scanners that can look at block trades, you really want to be paying attention to the block trade scanners for the next few weeks, because the first quarter of 2021 has ended. So now we are probably going to see a lot of money flowing in and out for the next few weeks, okay? So watch those block trade scanners. Pay attention to what companies are getting a lot of volume. It will tell you kind of what those funds are doing. So let's move on to gold here. Gold, you had a nasty downtrend. You're still staying right in that downtrend. Nothing new. Every time it tries to bounce up, it gets sold off. You tried to bounce up here. You hit the OTS trail, gave you a sell signal, and that was the local top. So you are pulling back. But look at what the OTS is doing. The OTS is finally starting to turn green and gray out of that red trend. So you are finding buyers. The buyers are trying to buy this dip and push gold out of this downtrend. But you are not going to find any substantial buyers until you start holding above 1,800. Okay, you really want gold to hold above 1,800, 1,825, 1,850, kind of this whole little resistance right here where we tried to bounce last time. We really need to find value above that level, okay? So I would not be too bullish on gold until you start getting above that 1810, 1825. Right now, no real reason to buy this. If it pulls back, maybe look for a double bottom. You could get a bulldog and then bounce off that low. But for now, I would not be buying this. This is not really it's not giving you any signals, right? There's no signals to buy this. It is bouncing a little bit off support, but momentum is already kind of pulling back a little bit. You're starting to turn green again, but you had a nasty pullback there. No strong breakout on the trend. Now, what I do like about the trend, you are breaking out of that downtrend, but the Momo, if this was actually breaking out of this downtrend, the Momo would be surging here. Okay, the trend is not surging, so this could be a fake out. If this short-term momentum starts to fall, this will push the trend line back into that bearish trend. Okay, so don't get faked out by that. Until this trend line starts to surge with that short-term momentum, I would not feel comfortable longing gold here. But all right, moving on to oil. Oil had a basically the first pullback it's had since it launched in November. You had that massive move up, basically just uptrending all the way, and then we finally had a pullback where we turned red on the OTS. The OTS trail also turned red. So this is actually creating a little downtrend here. This could be somewhat of a head and shoulders too, if you pop up and then fail. What I do like about oil here is you have a ton of support below you with a bunch of pivots, and you're also bouncing off the 50-day moving average. One thing I don't like is the OTS is red, the OTS trail is red, and the Momo has completely lost its trend. So this is definitely creating a downtrend. If you don't bounce right out of this, this is going to be the local top for oil, and you probably will start to find lower value, maybe back down to that pivot. Okay, so we want to see a very strong bounce on oil here within, I'd say, this week. So if we don't see a strong bounce by Friday, this is probably either going to double top or maybe head and shoulders and go lower. Okay, if it does push higher, look for around $70 as your upper target. All right, moving on to Bitcoin. Bitcoin kind of looks like SPY here, where you're putting in new highs. You're trying to put in new highs, but then you're pulling back to the 50-day moving average. Pulled back to the 50-day there, almost pulled back there, and then we pulled back here. Okay, so the 50-day is holding us up, and look at the 50-day. Steadily climbing, okay? So this trend is very strong. You have a little bit of a bear trap happening here, where the short-term momentum was selling off rapidly, but now we're coming back, and that long-term momentum isn't really, it's losing a little bit, but it's pretty flat. You're pretty bullish. If this long-term momentum starts to fail this zone here, back down towards the zero line, or even goes negative, then you're probably putting in a local top for Bitcoin. Most likely go back down to like 44,000, 45,000, somewhere around there. But as long as the Momo is showing a bear trap, which it currently is, you can see the last couple times you had a little bear trap here, you shot up higher. So watch for that bear trap. It looks like Bitcoin wants to go higher. You are red on the OTS, but I'd say as soon as you get back above this resistance, above like 57, 58, that red will turn off very quickly. You'll have a lot of buyers step in, and you'll turn green right away. So if you stay below that high, below 58, very likely probably going to go back down to like 48 to 45. But if you can pierce that high, very likely going to all-time highs. Look for around 63 to around 68 as your targets. Moving on to Ethereum. Ethereum is a little different here. This is more bearish than Bitcoin because you had a push up into the trend here, right? All-time high, fail downward, attempt to push higher, kind of double topped there. So it was almost putting in a cup and handle, right? I think we talked about this last week where you had that cup and handle. This cup and handle has been invalidated because you were not able to break through right there and you actually sold off. And look at what it's doing. You sold off to the pivot and then you pulled back, and now we're retesting the 50-day moving average as resistance, and we're failing. Okay, so this is pretty ugly. And also look at the 50-day moving average. It's not as steady as Bitcoin. It's already starting to top out. So you have a little bit of a topping pattern here. You see how Bitcoin is still very steady? Ethereum is not steady here. Ethereum is topping out. So if you can't bounce off these pivots very quickly, putting in a new high, I'd say you want to break that high minimum around 1900, or you're going to fail lower, most likely back down to like 1400 or 1300, kind of where the support was last time. That bounced beautifully. We called this out a few weeks ago. So that would be your next support if you do break these pivots. Okay, so either break into a new high very soon. I'd probably say by Sunday, because it is 24/7. So I'd say by the weekend, if you can't put in a new high, very likely going back to 1400 or 1300. All right. All right, that is the summary of markets. Actually, let me give you a target if we do break out here. If we do break out, look for around 2250. All right. But that is the summary of markets. Let's move on. Before we go to the watch list, I want to show you guys something that we were looking at last week in the Discord. I was showing you guys kind of how to look at the value of the price action that we were seeing the past few days. Okay, so using my volume profile techniques, I've gone over this many times on my YouTube. If you guys haven't already, go watch my volume profile videos. But basically what we were seeing a downtrend, right? You were finding value lower and lower, right? And then we had that value be put in on Thursday, and we immediately started bouncing. So our pre-market session on Thursday, or sorry, this was actually Wednesday sold off and then Thursday bounced. So we had that sell-off, finding that value lower, but then Thursday was a very sharp V reversal, right? So we had a very sharp V reversal, and then on the start of Friday, the actual open of the candle, we had a very strong day where we found a bullish imbalance. We had that value kind of putting in like a bull flag, right? Where you had lower value, and then we pushed away from that value and created a higher value zone. So this is creating a bullish imbalance. And I told you guys in Discord that everything looked good. And every time that it pulled back, I told you guys it wasn't really losing anything. We're just creating a balance, right? So you had that balance, support, support, support. Look at where it's bouncing. This red line is the POC. So we bounced off the POC, made a new high, bounced off the POC, and then ripped higher. So very, very key levels that we want to watch for tomorrow's open is this zone right here. This is what's called a single print. This is when one side, either the buyers or sellers, is extremely strong and there is no real transactions happening there. There's not a lot of volume happening there because one side is just overwhelming the other side, and they're either buying it straight up and pushing through all the ask, or they're selling it straight off and they're pushing through all the bids, right? So there's not a lot of volume being transacted there. So what that does is it creates a massive support. So like you see this little area right here before we start to create that single print, that is also the value area high. This creates a massive support. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and mark this out. That is the value area high of Friday. And then we're also going to mark out this little single print zone. This is a very key battle zone. Okay, so if we come back and test this level tomorrow, any value that's transacted here is going to be inherently bullish. Okay, because we had massive resistance creating this value area here, and then we broke out of that value. So if we come back down to retest that value or that single print, the buyers should step in. So it's going to be inherently bullish. Okay, so as long as we stay above 39.30, all of this price action, even if it's a nasty pullback, will be bullish. So don't get chopped out by that. Okay, we want to see as much value as we can above this kind of close on Friday, because that will indicate that we want to go higher. All right. And I'm going to quickly go through all these other charts because now that you guys get what I'm looking at here, you guys can kind of see it's the same on every index. So we have the value area high here on NASDAQ, and then we have that little single print area where the buyers were overwhelming the sellers. So that is going to be our battleground tomorrow, okay? Or even today when the market opens at 6 o'clock. Same thing here. This is just not giving you that single print, okay? So we just started before the bell putting in those single prints. So this doesn't really have a battle area. You just want to watch out for that value area high and then maybe the POC. So basically 2200 and 2213. You want to hold above those levels for Russell. And then moving on to Dow, you have that value area high at 32,711. And then we have that battleground of single prints right here. Okay, so we want to see as much price action above this zone as we can. But any price action that pulls back into that zone, remember, it's going to be inherently bullish. All right. So now let's move on to the watch list now that we have that done. Actually, a couple more things I wanted to note here before we moved on to the watch list. I gave you guys in Discord kind of like the last lines of support that we wanted to see hold, or this was going to start shifting into a kind of a local bear market. Not like a long-term bear market, but more like a local bear market. So I gave you guys these levels that we must hold. And every single one of those levels held perfectly. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the buyers are very strong. The buyers bought the dip on every index. Okay, even Qs, that was getting hammered. So this VWAP level here, that was my final level for ES. And we held beautifully. And then we had massive confirmation on Friday. Okay, let's look at NASDAQ. Same thing. I gave you guys a level on NASDAQ. I think it was actually on Qs. On Qs, I told you guys 310 was the level that I wanted to see hold. It went a little bit lower. It went down to like 308, but it wicked it. So that was beautiful. The buyers stepped in. Once again, confirmation on Friday. So moving on to Russell here. Same thing. We wanted to hold VWAP. Bottom ticked it. Confirmation. Russell is a little more bearish than the other indexes because you're below this VWAP level here. So we want to get above like 2231, and then we can start to push into all-time high. Okay. And then finally on Dow, almost to the point. We missed this by like 10 points. I wanted to see it hold 31,940. That was like this local high here. Pulled back, wicked it, confirmation on Friday. So unless this is like the dirtiest fake out that we've seen in months, this looks really, really good. We had the quad witching last week. It was the week after quad witching, which is historically extremely bearish. So now that that is over, now that the stimulus stuff is over, now that the dividends are paid, now that all the support has been tested locally, I think we can go higher. Okay. So what stocks am I looking at for strong bounces? Basically the same stocks that I've been watching the entire past few weeks. FedEx looks good. You pulled back to retest support, 267. We're pushing up into those VWAPs, 276, 281. Both those targets were hit. Next target, 289. Infrastructure, this is the infrastructure ETF. They're still talking about the infrastructure plan. They just paid dividends. It's been priced in. You do have a little bit of a gap up, so it's a little scary. Could come back to retest that gap, but this looks really good. Strong day on Thursday. Strong confirmation on Friday. It looks pretty strong. Look for around 35 as your upper target. Talking about infrastructure, look at steel. Steel had almost a 12% day on Friday. You had a nasty candle on Thursday creating new lows, and then you gapped up and ran hard on Friday. Strong volume too. So people are buying this. Okay, so keep an eye on steel. This is still playing out the cup and handle that I told you guys. This looks like a cup and handle. It is textbook. Okay, so as long as we don't go below like 2021, I think we go to 2550, maybe even 2860. Okay. Another good one is United Health. This is the number one holding in the Dow Jones. And as we saw earlier, the Dow Jones looks really, really good. The Dow Jones is most likely going to go into all-time highs next week, unless we have some kind of bad news. All right. So this is the number one holding in Dow Jones. This looks really strong. It's running up into earnings. It's a little extended. If you guys aren't already in this, probably don't want to hop in here on the high. But if it pulls back towards earnings, keep an eye on it after earnings. I think this thing really can run. Now, we already talked about oil. If oil bounces off that 50-day moving average that I was telling you guys about, then the energy sector, XLE, will have a hell of a week. Okay, like I told you guys on oil, the only way that it looks really bullish is if it has a very strong bounce. That very strong bounce will lead XLE into like 54 to 55. Okay, so keep a close eye on oil. Those value ETFs that I was watching a while back when the growth sector was getting hurt, these ETFs are still doing very well. They pulled back like all the indexes did, quickly were bought up. So keep an eye on IWD, IVE, and VONV. Okay, All three of these value ETFs are getting good volume, bouncing off support. They most likely will be going to all-time highs. Next up, Snapchat. Snapchat, I don't understand really why it's getting hammered here. I think it's just getting hammered with the other growth stocks. They haven't had any really bad news that I could find. This looks like it's an exaggerated move. I don't think that Snapchat should be selling off this quickly. Okay, so maybe for a lotto, if you want to buy the dip and maybe look for a short-term bounce into like 55, 56, that could be very possible. For a longer-term play, if it holds VWAP here above 52, I think we go back to the previous VWAP around 63. You're already putting in a bull div, and the last few times that we pulled back on the Momo like this, we started ripping higher. Okay. Now, this is slightly different. You do kind of have a head and shoulders being put in here. Very choppy. So any pullback into like 57 to like 60 is very bearish. I would not be long-term bullish on Snapchat until we reclaim that VWAP around 63. If we do reclaim that VWAP, very easily all-time highs, maybe even like 75, 80. Okay. Moving on to Jets. Jets is the airline ETF like I've been talking about the past few weeks. I still like airlines here. I still like travel. You're having good vaccine news back-to-back, basically. Lots of people getting vaccinated. The travel sector did get hurt a little bit because the CDC pushed on cruises. They don't like sailing right now. They think that cruises should push back their sailing to, I think it was like November. So the travel sector did get hurt a little bit. But I think it's all priced in, really. I think all the bad news that the travel sector could really get, they've already had, right? People understand that these companies are not generating revenue, right? So that's already priced in. A couple of the cruise lines, a couple of the airlines, they do have earnings coming up, so watch out for that. I think Carnival had earnings recently. Let me check. I know a couple of the other cruise lines have earnings as well. Oh, so it's actually coming up this week. So I think Carnival has earnings this week if TradingView is accurate. So watch those earnings. If the travel sector, they're going to have bad earnings, right? We already know that. But if they are better than expected, or if they're still bad, but the people are still buying, that is a very good sign that people do not care about the bad news on the travel sector. Okay? So once again, if they have bad earnings and they still go up, or if they have better than expected earnings and they go up, people just don't care about the bad news, and they're going to pump money into these travel stocks. Okay, so keep an eye on the travel stocks. I think they could be massive performers this year as long as the CDC doesn't just keep hammering them with postponing cruises and whatnot. Next up was NEO. NEO is basically sitting on a cliff right now. If you are a very high risk adverse person, you like taking the risk, you want something kind of like a lotto, you could buy NEO here. This could be a double bottom, and if it is a double bottom, this will be the bottom. NEO will not go lower because the volume that we are seeing in this area is very significant. You can see how we had massive volume back here when we kind of generated that value. And then once we tried to push higher, we had no volume. It had no value. They did not find value in this area, right? So now that we're selling off to retest that older value, it's even lower than that value. We're retesting that older value and we're finding more volume. So we are finding value here. So if this double bottoms here, I think this could easily turn into a bulldog and we could push all the way back into all-time high. Okay, but it cannot lose this level. If it loses this double bottom, very likely going back to around 25 to 26, it will get hammered. Okay. But like I said, if you're a high risk person, you like the risk here, this is probably one of the highest risk to reward setups that I have on my watch list. It probably is the highest. Okay. So watch the double bottom here on NEO. We could easily go to local target, I'd say around 45, you buy the bottom here. Midterm target, I'd probably say around 55. And then long term, obviously all-time high, probably around like 70. Okay. Ford, I still like Ford. I would like to see a little bit more of a consolidation. I want to see it find value. So I probably won't touch Ford until earnings. So unless it like starts ripping or something, I don't know. Maybe if it pulls back, I'll sell puts on VWAP. But I want to see some more value. It's not giving me enough value here. We tried to push for a new high, and then we sold off. So I want to see some value, some consolidation. I want it to hold VWAP. If it holds VWAP, maybe I'll sell some puts below, and then we'll look for that push into like 14. But that's basically all I'm looking at here on Ford. Viacom, this is another one of those very high risk, high reward setups that I have on my watch list. We actually day traded this on Friday. If you guys are in Discord, I sold the 35 puts, I think. I sold the 35 puts, I believe, when we were at the bottom. We literally sold them at the bottom. Well, not really. I sold them for $1.50 credit. I could have got $2.50, so I could have got a little juicier credit. But then we bought them back in like an hour later for 50 cents, I believe. So we made $100 a contract in like an hour. So it was a beautiful trade. It made my day green. JMA actually bought some leaps on this because JMA loves to buy dips on big blue chip companies, big name companies that have been around for decades that have massive, massive dips. He likes to buy those and just hold on to them. Kind of like what we saw in Intel. We had an Intel trade like that last year where Intel gapped down and just bled out. And then we bought the bottom, and then we didn't buy the bottom, but we bought it, waited for it to retrace. We made money. That's basically what JMA is doing. He bought leaps on Viacom. He likes this dip on this company. Viacom is one of the biggest media conglomerates in the world. And they sold off 61% in, what is that, 4 or 5 days? That's disgusting. The reason they sold off mainly was because what I talked about in the beginning of the video, they had a massive guy taking leveraged positions in these telecommunications companies. So when they started to sell off, he got liquidated basically. And he had to take any offer he could get. You had big hedge funds offering him block trades. They were having to block trade his positions basically. He was being liquidated. So this is a capitulation event. This is not Viacom getting nuked on like bad news. They did get downgraded a few times. So it is kind of a cascading failure. They got downgraded. They had the liquidations. But they didn't get downgraded to the point where they should go down 70% in 5 days. Okay, so this would be considered like a value company. And because they're going down so much, people are going to bet on this long term. So keep an eye on the leaps. I think the leaps on Viacom, the leaps on Discovery, they're going to get a lot of volume probably in the next few weeks. Also, like I said in the beginning of the video, keep an eye on the block trade scanners. Viacom was all over my block trade scanner. The hedge funds were buying this thing up, and they were also selling it. You had Goldman Sachs selling a massive chunk of their position on Viacom last week. But keep an eye on the block trade scanners. If they start buying up these companies, Viacom, Discovery, any of the companies that sold off recently, that is a sign that they're betting on these companies long term. Okay? All right, moving on. PLTR had a massive falling wedge here. You actually broke out of this falling wedge bearishly, but then we pulled back inside the wedge here, kind of failed it one more time, bounced off it one more time, and now we're breaking it. So if we see confirmation on this next week and we kind of start breaking this wedge, this could be very bullish back into like 27. Okay, so watch this wedge here. It's very choppy. You kind of have to force the wedge. It's not pretty. But if we do start finding value around 24, 25, very likely we'll start pushing out of this nasty chop that we've been in. Okay. Big C still playing out that massive falling wedge on the daily. Bull div still being put in. You have a little bit of a pullback here on the momentum. But if you zoom in, we are still holding that trend line. Okay. I want to see it break this kind of local downtrend here. So I want to see it get to like 56, 57, 58, somewhere around here. And then kind of find some value. And then start to push out of this wedge. But as long as we hold above, I'd say like $50, it looks fine. This is a very, very bullish pattern. The only downside, not a lot of volume. Okay, so something like this, disgustingly bullish pattern, we should be seeing massive volume coming in, right? We're just not seeing it. So a little scary. Moving on, UUP. I am long dollar, just as a hedge. I'm still holding silver, and silver's getting destroyed. So I decided to take some leaps on UUP as a hedge for my portfolio. Now, the main reason I took this is if we look at Dixie, Dixie is still holding this massive monthly, like this is what, 10-year, 12-year support. We put in this high in 2008. We tested the high in 2018. And then we tested the high again just now, a few months ago, right? So massive support. Also putting in a bulldog. We have a daily bulldog, perfect bulldog, textbook. And now we're breaking out of it. Okay, so the dollar looks really bullish. It's actually scary how bullish the dollar looks. Typically, when the dollar is very bullish, stocks don't do very well, right? Because people want to hold the dollar, they don't want to hold equities. Okay. Now, looking at USD JPY, also extremely bullish. This is not good, right? So I took a hedge on the dollar. If it continues upward, we'll make money. We're already up like 20% on this position, so it's looking pretty good. FMAC, nothing to say. I'm bag holding. It's below its asset value, which is disgusting. We're waiting on any kind of news. It gives me any kind of news where I can get out around break even or $12. I'll take it. But basic bag holding right now. Subs, the streaming ETF, took a nasty hit last week. I think I'm actually going to buy this dip. So depending on what we look like tomorrow or Tuesday, I'm probably going to start buying some shares here. I'm only in about half the size that I want to be in, and I think my average is around 14. So I want to buy some more shares here to lower my average. So I'll probably buy some shares at 13. If we go down to like 12.50, I'll probably buy some more there as well. This is a long-term play. They hold all the big name streaming companies. Their largest holding is like Spotify. They also have like Netflix, Disney, all the big ones. But it's a long-term play. I'm going to dollar cost average into it and look for kind of like 6 months, 12 months out. Look for some profit. All right. Sorry, this video is getting a little long here. Let's end it up here with big tech. We have a lot of consolidation here on Microsoft. Really, Microsoft is not bullish until you hold above VWAP, 239. Hold above VWAP, look for the gap fill. It's already filled it once, 241, and then look for all-time high. You have to hold above VWAP. Apple, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. There's really no reason to take Apple here. It looks like it could go down to like 116. I don't like Apple until it holds above like 125. I really don't like it long-term until you hold above VWAP around 130. But if you wanted to take more of a short-term kind of scalp swing trade here, you would be taking kind of basically where it is now, or buying the dip at 116 and then targeting like 127, 130. Okay, I just don't like the chart. Wait for a break of the downtrend. Wait for some support to be reclaimed. I wouldn't be diving into Apple here. Moving on to Facebook. Nasty pullback last week, but like I told you guys, it didn't matter if it pulled back really hard. It was still going to be bullish as long as it held above like 277. And that's exactly what we did. We held above 277 and now we're bouncing. So as long as we hold above 277, this probably is the local bottom. Okay, it's putting in a very choppy bulldog, double bottom, pop up, pullback, right? So as long as we hold above that support, which is also VWAP, around 277, 287 is very likely, and then maybe 300. Okay. Netflix still choppy, finding a lot of value in this area. Long term, if Netflix starts to break above like 560, 575, this thing is going to absolutely explode. But until then, there's no reason to take any long-term trades on it. Short term, you could buy the support down here around like 500. As long as we hold 500, probably go back to like 525, maybe VWAP around 550. But kind of the same thing, like I said about Apple, there's not really a trade here. The only thing you could really do on Netflix is, like I always tell you guys, Netflix loves to fill its gaps. Every single gap on Netflix chart is filled. Okay, so if you want to take a lotto, I would take a gap fill lotto. You would be taking like the 520s, the 515s, somewhere around there. That is your target. Until that gap fill has been achieved, there's no reason to target anything else because Netflix fills every gap. Okay, so like I said, watch that gap fill. You could take a lotto for that. Moving on to Amazon, kind of in the middle of nowhere, sitting on support, but you want to get above like 3,100, 3,150 before it starts looking better. It really doesn't look good until you hold above 32. We have a little bit of a gap right here around 32.50 that we want to fill. If it can hold above VWAP above 32, like 75, 33.40, 34.40. Okay. Finally, Tesla, very, very ugly kind of inverse head and shoulders here. But if we do break this neckline, I'd say above like 712, 715, 725, somewhere around there. Very likely get VWAP around 766. Very likely get VWAP around 825. Okay, but I would not be bullish on Tesla until at least we break that kind of slanted neckline. It would be a lot more bullish if we broke above like 711. Okay, so watch out for that. If it does nuke, watch for support around 560 and 496. But all right, guys, this has been a long video. Sorry about that. Hopefully you guys got some value out of this. Make sure to hit that like button if you guys like the video, and I will be seeing you guys tomorrow for our live trading session in Discord. Peace out, guys.